Hey guys, this is Shanna with Green Living, and I thought it would be good to do a video on what is classical education, and then also what is classical conversations and how it uses the classical method of educating. There's a lot of great videos on classical education, and I'm going to put the link to my favorite one down below so that you can get a more in-depth picture of what is classical education. But just for now, I'm going to be giving an overview just briefly, and then again, how classical conversations kind of uses that model. And some of the best thinkers have come from the classical education model. J.R. Tolkien, which is my favorite author, was classically educated. And so what this method does is it breaks down educates kids in 3 stages. The first stage is the grammar stage, and it roughly corresponds to elementary school. It's about up to 6th grade. And then there's the logic phase, which is 7th and 8th grade. And then finally there's the rhetoric stage, and that's roughly 9th through 12th grade. And what it does is it works with the natural tendencies of the child and the natural stages that the child is in anyways. So in the grammar stage, so kindergarten through 6th grade, that is a time when kids are just, they're little sponges. They soak up everything around them. You think about what a child does from birth to age 5. It's just remarkable how much they learn. And then again, from kindergarten to 5th, 6th grade, what their development, they're just learning leaps and bounds. Their development is huge in those years. And so they just soak up information. They love to repeat things. They love chants. They love songs. They love rhymes. They just don't seem to get tired of the same things over and over again. They always ask to read the same book over and over again, much to parents' chagrin at times. They want to see the same movies over and over again. They love repetition. And so the classical model, basically, the goal is just to pack as much information into that grammar stage as possible. They're just filling their minds with good, useful information. They do that through chanting, through rhymes, through repetition, through song, through dance, through movements, all that types of thing. And understanding is not necessarily the goal, especially in the younger years, kindergarten through 3rd grade. Understanding is not necessarily the goal. We'll try to explain it kind of as we go, but it's more important just that the child has memorized the fact at this stage. And it's kind of funny because I was actually kind of using this method without even realizing what I was doing with my kids, even before I knew what the classical model was. So with my kids, when they were all starting, even before they could speak really, around I think 18 months to 2, they were talking but not well, we started doing Bible verses. And I have videos of all 3 of my boys saying Bible verses before they could really even speak. They would kind of say a garbled word, and we would learn sign language to go along with it. And so the first verse we started off with was John 3:16. So I have a video of my 18-month-old saying John 3:16 with hand motions, and he had no idea what he was saying. He doesn't know what eternal means. He doesn't know what perish means, only son. He didn't understand at all what he was saying. Just the fact was that he memorized it. So now that he's in 5th grade, he's understanding what it means. And even, my 2nd grader, now that they're older, they understand what they learned when they were younger. And so that, and with my kids in Bible verses, so we did repetition, we did songs, we did chants, we did hand motions, and we repeated it over and over and over again. So now those verses are ingrained in their brain. And now that they're older, they understand what they were saying. So it's very, very similar to what we're doing in every subject with the grammar phase. We're basically just teaching them facts, filling their minds. We're reading lots and lots and lots of stories, lots of books, making learning fun and interesting, spending lots and lots of time together. And so that is the grammar stage. Then you move on to the logic phase, which is 7th and 8th grade, and then the focus becomes more on understanding in greater depth what the child has already learned. And this stage, they also they take a formal logic class and then debate class. And there's a great book called The Lost Tools of Learning by Dorothy. It was written in the 1940s. And in it, she says that children of this age are going to argue anyway, so you might as well help them argue well. And I absolutely love that quote, because if you've been around 7th and 8th graders for any length of time, you know that they argue about everything. And so her point is teach them to argue well, and I love that point. And so I'm looking forward to my kids getting into that stage, teaching them how to argue well, giving them the tools of logic, giving them the tools to debate. And then finally, moving into the rhetoric stage, 9th through 12th grade, that's when you deepen your understanding, and then also the focus is on synthesizing the information and communicating it. And so you're turning that, your eye outward and being able to communicate and get across your ideas. And so I think that these, particularly the logic and the rhetoric phase, which learning formal logic, learning debate, learning how to speak and communicate effectively and clearly is so vital. And it's a tool that is very, very, very lacking in our society today. You just need to spend a few minutes on Facebook and you know exactly what I'm talking about, rather than having well thought out discussions, well thought out, arguments, not bad arguments, but just debates kind of on Facebook. You have name calling, you have slamming, you have cuss words, you have, if someone doesn't agree with you, you just call them, a stupid blankety blankety blank. And that's how we argue in our society today. Totally gone are the tools of communication, totally gone are logic and reasoning, and we've just almost completely lost that ability. And so I'm really excited to be able to give my kids these tools. And the way that we have chosen to do that is through a program, a homeschooling co-op called Classical Conversations. Now, you can educate your child classically at home by yourself. There are lots of private schools that have the classical model. There's a lot of hybrid schools. Where you might go to school, 2 days a week and then homeschool the rest of the time. So there's all kinds of ways. Classical Conversations is not the only way to classically educate your child. It's just, for us, it's the most cost-effective way. The private schools can get pricey, and it's just the easiest way for me. If I were just trying to classically educate my child just kind of out there on my own, I think it'd be a little bit more difficult. There are resources, but I like Classical Conversations because it's just all laid out for you. So what it is basically is we meet once a week in a co-op. You come together, and the classrooms are divided out by ages, and there is a tutor, or a teacher, which is called a tutor, that has a group of students. The maximum for the class is 8. We like to keep it small. And then in these classes we cover 7 subjects, so to speak. The first one is history, and that encompasses a timeline. It starts with creation and it goes all the way to current events. So it has every major event, people group throughout the course of history. And so there's a really great song that we'd sing and hand motions help you remember it. Each week there's a history sentence that you learn about. We do geography, we have English, Latin, math, and science. Okay, and then the 7th would be the timeline. So technically 6 subjects, but 7 with the timeline. And so this Classical Conversations is not a comprehensive program. It's just basically an overview. So what it does is it gives parents kind of the framework for what to be doing, and then the parents go home that week, and then the parents kind of fill in and go as deep as they want to go with each subject. So for example, we're on week 4. Okay, and then there's also, for Classical Conversations, what's called the Foundations Guide. So this is just the Foundations program. This is not the Logic or Rhetoric program. So there is the Foundations Guide, and in it kind of gives an overview of each, let me find it, of each week. So this is a well-loved copy. My page fell out, but basically you can see here, there's the history, there's the timeline, the sentence, the geography. Geography, we're learning right now all the states and all the capitals, and every day they draw a map, and so that really helps them learn the geography and the states and the capitals. And so again, just that repetition. The science, there is I can't read backwards, the English sentence, and then there's Latin vocab words. And then the math, this is not a comprehensive math program. This is basically, the math is just learning skip counting, and that helps with multiplication. You do need to supplement a math program separate from Classical Conversations, and you need to supplement a language arts program separate from Classical Conversations. There's science, and then these are the extra activities that I'll get to in a minute. But so this is basically what makes up Classical Conversations. So for example, the history sentence this week is, let's see, we're on week 4. In 1776, the Continental Congress published the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia, announcing the colonist intent to form a new nation. So that's all that we learn when we go to our Classical Conversations co-op, just that one sentence. And then me as the parent, what I do is I go home and we read books about the Continental Congress. We read, picture books, we read chapter books, everything we can get our hands on about that time period, a little before, a little after.
These are just a few of the books that we've read this week. My favorite was George versus George, looking at George Washington versus King George III. We learned so much, and it was fun and entertaining with lots of pictures.
We're also watching Liberty Kids. There's a ton of YouTube videos, whatever subject you want to find. You can do YouTube videos, and I use videos to reinforce what we've already read about. So I don't usually teach with videos. I usually teach, and then I'll let them watch a video to kind of reinforce what we've learned. And then also, for example, science. So what are the parts of the nervous system? The brain, spinal cord, and nerves. So then what we do is that we can check out books from the library on the nervous system. Again, we watch YouTube videos on the nervous system. We've been drawing nerves. We've used Play-Doh to talk about the brain and the brainstem, different parts.
This is my oldest son showing off his Play-Doh creation of nerves.
I do use Apologia Science, and so I do also have that book that we use. But so Classical Conversations, basically it gives parents the framework, and then the parents kind of fill in as deep as they want to go throughout the week. Also at Classical Conversations, what I like is each week the child does a presentation, a 3-minute presentation. And I love this because it gets the child used to standing up and speaking in front of people. That's a great skill that everyone needs to have. And so I love that each week there's different topics that we get to present and practice on. And then also we do a fine arts. And so when we go to Classical Conversations that 1 week, so I tutor. So me as a tutor, I need to prepare some type of fine arts. The first 6 weeks is drawing. And so I'll have a little drawing thing, and it's all laid out in this foundation guide, what you're supposed to do. And then we do a science experiment in Classical Conversations, and that's fun because sometimes it's hard I try to do science experiments here at the house on my own, but sometimes it's hard to gather up all the necessary materials, or it's just always fun to do science experiments. And then there's a time that we review at Classical Conversations, and I like it because obviously the camaraderie, I think we've made some really great friends there, and me as a mom, it's a support group for me, it's friends for my kids. It also teaches them to be in a classroom. My kids were in public school, so they know how to be in a classroom, but just to reinforce those, you sit quietly, you listen, you raise your hand before speaking, just having that classroom environment, I really like a lot. And then, so foundations is kindergarten through 6th grade, and then which corresponds to the grammar stage of classical education. And then also with Classical Conversations in 4th grade, you can start a writing program called Essentials. And Essentials is a phenomenal program. That is another big reason that I chose to do Classical Conversations. They use IEW, Institute of Excellence in Writing, and they use a grammar. That's a great grammar program. I actually was able to teach this IEW, and I taught Shirley grammar at a hybrid classical model of school in Maryland. So the kids attended school for 2 days, and then they did the rest of the work at home the other 3 days. And so that's where I first began kind of hearing about the classical model. When my oldest was in pre-K, kindergarten, there were some friends at church who did the Classical Conversations. And so that's how I first heard about the model. And then they actually kind of helped get me this job at the classical school. And so that's really how my first exposure. And I was so impressed by the English program that I was teaching that I knew that I wanted to put my son in that program. But that year, so that was when he was in kindergarten. So then in 1st grade, we ended up moving to Georgia. And so I didn't do that. But I've always wanted to put him in to this Essentials of Excellence in IEW writing, and they call it Essentials with the Classical Conversations. And so that's 4th through 6th grade. And our son is in 5th grade this year. This is the first year that we've been able to homeschool. And so I'm really excited that he's able to do this writing program and then the grammar part. And so that's basically Classical Conversations in a really short.
So it can get a little confusing when you're talking about general classical education and the Classical Conversations homeschool co-op. So I put together a little chart to kind of help us compare the two and keep them straight. The first stage of general classical education is called the grammar phase. And within the homeschooling co-op Classical Conversations, that corresponds with foundations, which is kindergarten through 6th grade. And then 4th through 6th graders add a writing class that I talked about called Essentials. They use IEW. Then the logic stage is sometimes called the dialectic stage, and that's challenge A and B within the Classical Conversations co-op. And finally, the rhetoric stage of classical education is called the challenge 1, 2, 3, and 4 within the homeschool co-op.
It aligns well with my personal philosophy of education. It aligns well with how I think that kids learn best, at least my kids learn best. It's, again, I was kind of doing the classical model without even realizing it, really just educating them, helping them learn number rhymes and chants and things like that, and songs and all of that. And so I'm going to put a link at the bottom. Great speaker on this subject. And so I hope that you enjoyed this really short overview of the classical model of education and classical conversations, and comment below if you have any questions, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching.
If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you want to follow along on our homeschooling journey, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of our videos.